I moved into the neighborhood in late September. The air had just started to turn crisp, the trees lining the cul-de-sac, catching fire in slow motion. It was the kind of place that promised peace. Big lawns, bigger houses, and silence so thick it felt manufactured. Perfect for someone like me, single 29 trying to outrun burnout and the noise of city life. The house I bought wasn't anything special, a two-story fixer-upper with warped shutters and a backyard full of stubborn weeds, but it was mine. And it backed up to woods thick enough to muffle the world. The only thing that felt off was the house next door. It was massive, immaculate black paneling, minimalist architecture, and a driveway that curved like a private road. It looked like it had been built from a different blueprint entirely, one that didn't belong in this sleepy suburb. Even stranger than the house was the man who lived there. Damon. He was hard to describe. Not because he looked unusual, but because he didn't. Tall, pale, early 30s, always dressed like he was either going to a dinner party or coming back from one. There was something flat about him, like he was performing a version of normal. He hadn't quite rehearsed enough. I first met him when I walked over to introduce myself. He answered the door instantly, like he'd been standing on the other side waiting. We made small talk. He smiled at the right moments, laughed when appropriate, but the whole exchange felt choreographed, like a scene from a play where I was the only one who didn't know the script. When I joked about the neighborhood being too quiet, he said, "Most people here keep to themselves." Then he tilted his head and added, "You should come by for a drink sometime." I smiled. "How about now?" And just like that, the energy shifted. His face froze. His eyes darted past me over my shoulder, as if checking to make sure we were alone. "Not tonight," he said softly. "I've got something going on." He gave me his number, turned and shut the door. I stood there for a second, staring at the polished black wood of his entrance, unsure of what had just happened. That night from my bedroom window, I saw the lights flicker in his upstairs hallway, on-off, on again. But no silhouettes passed, no movement, just static lighting changes like someone testing switches in an empty stage set. Something about Damon unnerved me from the beginning, but I didn't know why. Not yet. It started with the music. I was in the middle of editing a client video when I noticed something odd, a soft rhythmic thump coming through my office walls. At first, I thought it was my neighbor mowing his lawn or someone playing music too loud. But the sound wasn't mechanical. It had a pulse, bass echoes of laughter, faint clinks of glass, muffled voices caught in a constant loop of celebration. A party. It was past 11 p.m. I stood up and looked through my window at Damon's house. Every light in his home was on bright golden rectangles, glowing behind sleek black windows. I spotted silhouettes, bodies moving, chatting, even someone dancing slowly on the second-floor balcony. Music spilled into the night, mixed with bursts of applause and the tinkling of glassware. It was the most alive I'd ever seen the house. The thing is, I never saw anyone arrive. I threw on a hoodie and crossed the lawn. Not because I was nosy, at least. That's what I told myself, but because I had questions. Questions like, who were these people? How had they gotten inside without me noticing? And more importantly, why now? When I reached the front door, I froze. Shoes, at least 30 pairs, maybe more, lined up in perfect rows on the front porch, like guests at a temple, not a house party. I bent down. The shoes weren't worn down. They were pristine, like they'd never been walked in. I knocked once, twice. The music kept going uninterrupted. Nobody answered. I reached for my phone to text Damon, but I stopped halfway. The music was strange, off-tempo. It looped just slightly, the same laugh, the same glass clink, the same line of idle chatter repeating every 30 seconds. That's when it clicked. It wasn't live sound, it was recorded. I leaned closer to the door. The laughter was too clean, too polished. It wasn't bleeding from a room filled with people. It was coming from speakers, big ones. I backed up slowly, eyes darting from window to window. The silhouettes had stopped moving. They stood frozen like cardboard cutouts, their edges blurring slightly in the backlight. None of them turned, none of them spoke. Just still. Then the porch light above me turned off. I didn't run. Not at first. I walked backwards until I reached my driveway. Only when I turned the corner of my house did I let myself sprint, slammed the door, locked everything. From my bedroom window, the lights at Damon's went dark, one by one, and the music stopped. The next morning, every shoe was gone, but there were no tire tracks in the driveway, no guests walking home, no sign a party had ever taken place. Except one thing, a single glass sitting on my porch railing, half full, lipstick on the rim. Then I checked my porch security camera. There was nothing. No party, no shoes, not even me walking up to Damon's door. Just a 5-hour gap. From 10:58 p.m. to almost 4 a.m. The feed was static, crisp, undisturbed, as if time had folded in on itself. Like that part of the night had simply been erased. That's when I started watching Damon's house more deliberately. It became a routine. Mornings over coffee. I'd peer through the blinds. Evenings before bed, I'd stare at the dark glass windows, waiting for movement. And sometimes I'd see it. A flicker in the hallway, a shape passing behind a curtain, but never him. Never Damon. He didn't leave for groceries, didn't take out trash. No delivery drivers ever stopped at his door. His car never moved. It was like he wasn't there at all. And yet, I knew he was. Late one night, I caught something that still makes my skin crawl. I had just turned off my bedroom light when I noticed a faint red glow coming from his upstairs window. I grabbed my binoculars. Don't judge. I used them for bird watching and zoomed in. Inside, bathed in that eerie red light, was Damon, sitting upright in a chair, staring directly at my window. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. And in that moment, I swear to God, I saw something move behind him. Not a person, not anything I could describe. Just a distortion, like heat waves rising off asphalt, a ripple in the air, and then it was gone. I dropped the binoculars. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after, because suddenly this wasn't about a strange neighbor or a fake party. It felt like I was being groomed for something, and I didn't know what. It all unraveled the night I decided to go back. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation or the growing certainty that if I didn't get answers, I was going to lose my mind. Either way, I found myself standing in Damon's driveway at exactly midnight, phone, flashlight off hot, slamming against my ribs. The house was dark, dead. Not even the porch light was on, but the front door, it was unlocked. I pushed it open. The interior was spotless, too spotless. The furniture looked staged, perfectly centered, unused. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic, sharp and sterile like a hospital hallway. I called out his name. No answer. I moved through the living room, then the kitchen, and finally down the hall to a door I hadn't seen before. It was half open, revealing a staircase leading downward. The basement, I hesitated, then descended. The temperature dropped with every step. The sound, too. It became muffled, as if I'd stepped into a vacuum, and then I saw it. A room square and white, humming. Faintly in the center, a large control panel with analog switches and a reel-to-reel tape player. The same looping sounds from before, party chatter, clinking glasses, fake laughter echoed from unseen speakers. Except now the sound was warped, slowed, distorted like a dying cassette. In the corner were mannequins. Not just mannequins, figures that looked like people but off. Their skin too smooth, their eyes glassy and too wide. They were dressed in party clothes. Each one wore a name tag. One said Ben, another said Sarah, a third said Damon. I turned, and there he was, standing behind me. But it wasn't Damon. Not really. The thing wearing his face smiled too wide, its eyes gleaming too bright, and in a voice that layered too many frequencies at once, it said, "You weren't supposed to come down here yet." Then the door slammed shut behind me. The lights dimmed, and the music started again. I ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just moved back toward the stairs, slamming into the wall as the basement pulsed with that distorted party noise. The mannequins seemed to shift in the corner of my vision, their heads tilting ever so slightly, their name tags fluttering like breathing lungs. I grabbed the railing, sprinted up the stairs, two at a time, but the door at the top locked. My fingers scrambled at the knob. It wouldn't budge behind me. I could hear the thing moving slow, heavy footsteps, echoing across the sterile concrete. "You're part of it," now it said. "You saw too much." I spotted a rusted utility pipe running along the wall and ripped it from its mounts. As the thing rounded the base of the stairs, I swung with everything I had. It connected. The Damon thing staggered, not from pain, but as if its body had to remember how to react. Its face-twisted features blurring for half a second like a glitched video feed. That's when I saw the panel, the control board. I dove back down, ignoring the panic surging in my chest. I yanked out wires, smashed buttons. The reel-to-reel hissed, warbled, then screeched like metal tearing. The mannequins convulsed. The thing screamed, not with its mouth, but from inside my head, a sharp, psychic screech that made my vision blur. I covered my ears, dropped to the floor, and the door above burst open. I crawled toward the light. I don't know how I got out. I remember my front lawn. I remember grass against my face. Then silence. The next morning, Damon's house was empty. No door, no windows, just a blackened foundation and scorched earth, like something had burned from the inside out. Nobody in the neighborhood remembers him, or the house, or me screaming in the night. It's been 3 months. I moved out the following week. Didn't tell anyone. Left most of my stuff behind. I still don't sleep through the night. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. No police ever showed up. No news reports, not even a whisper of something strange happening on our street. I tried reaching out to a few neighbors, but they looked at me like I was asking about a dream. "Damon," they'd say, "don't think I know anyone by that name." The property where his house once stood. It's just grass now, perfectly level, perfectly green, like nothing was ever there at all, not even a scorch mark. I asked the county for building records. They said the lot's been empty for decades. I know what you're thinking. Trauma, hallucinations, stress. Believe me, I've gone down that rabbit hole. Therapy, journaling, sleep studies. But nothing explains the tape. A week after I moved, I got a package. No return address. Inside was an old cassette tape, and written in marker on the front was one word: replay. I didn't want to listen, but I did. It was my voice, screaming, pleading, and underneath that barely audible was the sound of laughter. Dozens of voices, all looping in perfect time. The first time I saw Quinn, he was standing in the golden light of an autumn morning, locking the door to the big white house across the street. His tailored coat shimmered faintly, the kind that didn't belong in our quiet, aging neighborhood, and the sleek BMW parked beside him looked like it had been lifted from a music video. For a moment, I thought he might have gotten lost, some 20-something tech bro who meant to turn left and somehow ended up here in our little pocket of suburbia. But no, he moved in. From my perch on the front porch, knitting needles clacking rhythmically true, crime podcast whispering in my earbuds, I watched the house that had stood empty for years come to life. Quinn introduced himself on the third day, polite, charming, a bit too perfect. He said he worked in entertainment, something about managing a social media influencer. I didn't press. He had a nice smile. Benjamin liked him immediately. For weeks, life settled into its usual rhythm. I watered the garden. Benjamin tinkered with the car. Quinn waved when he left for wherever it was he went. Sometimes he lingered out front, talking to us about investments, sports, the absurd cost of espresso machines. A boy trying to act like a man, I thought, but likable. Nonetheless, then the girl appeared. She was pretty in the way. Glossy magazine covers demanded long blonde hair, a sharp chin, clothes that hugged in all the wrong places. She drove a little white convertible, always a bit too fast, always when Quinn wasn't home. The first few times I assumed she was house-sitting, maybe a girlfriend stopping by to water the plants. But there was something off. She didn't knock. She let herself in. She stayed for hours, even when the house sat dark and silent. Then she'd leave without looking around, expression blank, mechanical. One evening I saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat, both of them smiling tightly like people in a photo shoot. Not real, not relaxed. It should have comforted me, but it didn't. The very next day they were screaming. I was in the garden snipping basil when the sharp sound of a woman's voice shattered the calm. She was shrieking, wild, erratic, while Quinn stood frozen near his car, hands half raised in either surrender or defense. I couldn't hear the words, but the venom in her gestures was unmistakable. She slapped the air between them, then stormed off. The car door slammed like a gunshot. Quinn didn't look over. He just stood there for a long time, head bowed. Later that night, I thought I saw the girl again. Her car parked across the street, lights off. The house was dark. Quinn wasn't home. I told myself it was nothing, young love drama misunderstandings. But somewhere deep inside, the unease had begun, and it would only grow from there. The first truly strange moment came 3 days later. It was just after 10 when I turned off my audiobook and began my usual routine, locking the doors, checking the porch lights, fluffing the living room pillows the way I always did. Benjamin had already gone to bed. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, still the kind of peaceful silence that makes you feel alone in the world. That's when I saw her, the girl she lifted her hand and placed it flat against the front door, not to open it, not to knock, just held it there like she was trying to feel something through the wood. I thought about calling Quinn, but I didn't have his number. Instead, I did something stupid. I stepped out onto my porch and cleared my throat. Not loud, just enough to make a polite sound as if saying, "Hey, I see you. Everything okay?" Her head snapped toward me so fast I flinched. For a moment she just stared, then she smiled. Not a warm smile, not embarrassed or apologetic. A wide, vacant, predatory smile. She turned back to the door, pulled something from her coat pocket, a key, and let herself in. The porch light turned off a few seconds later. I stood frozen, half expecting to hear Quinn yell or the alarm blare or anything. But the house stayed silent. Eventually, I went back inside. I told myself that she had a key, that she was his girlfriend, that maybe they had made up. But the way she looked at me, that wasn't the look of someone caught doing something innocent. It was the look of someone who didn't care that they'd been caught at all. After that night, things started happening that I couldn't explain away. At first it was subtle. I'd be sitting on the porch sipping coffee, and I'd notice her car parked just far enough down the street to avoid suspicion, idling with the headlights off. Sometimes she sat in it for hours unmoving. Sometimes she wasn't in it at all, and yet the engine would still be running as if waiting for her. I told Benjamin, of course. He grunted, muttered something about none of our business, and went back to his crossword, but I couldn't let it go. One morning I watched Quinn leave his house, hair damp coffee in hand, earbuds in, and drive away like nothing was wrong. Not. 30 seconds later, Ellie stepped out from the side of the house. She hadn't come from the front door. She hadn't come from the car. She had been there the entire night, hiding. She held a small black box in her hand. I didn't know what it was at first, until she pried open the outdoor vent near the foundation and slid it inside. Then she vanished again, slipping into the backyard without a sound. I should have called someone. But who do you call when you're not sure what you saw? When the only thing you have is a sinking feeling and a vague fear that something is watching from the trees. A few days later, Quinn knocked on our door. He looked terrible, unshaven eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. "Somewhere private." Benjamin excused himself, and Quinn sat on our couch, staring into his untouched cup of tea. "She's not normal," he said finally. "Ellie, she won't leave me alone." He told me everything, how she'd stolen his spare key, how she'd installed hidden cameras, 5 of them disguised as wall hooks and power adapters, how she'd accessed his phone location without permission, how she somehow always knew where he was. "I've changed the locks," he said. "I've reset everything." "But she still gets in," I believed him. "God help me." I did. That same night I caught a flicker of movement in our backyard. I pulled back the curtain slowly. There behind the hedges crouched a figure, pale thin, watching our house. My heart slammed against my ribs as I backed away. By the time Benjamin looked, the yard was empty. No footprints, no sound, just the faint smell of perfume lingering on the air. Sweet familiar. The same perfume Ellie wore. It all came to a head one stormy night. Thunder rolled over the rooftops like distant artillery, and the rain fell in thick, slanting sheets. I was up late, unable to sleep. Something felt off. The neighborhood was too quiet, the kind of silence that sits on your chest and won't let you breathe. Just after midnight, I noticed movement across the street. Quinn's living room light flared on. Then off, then on again. Then I saw her. Ellie. She was inside. I rushed to the window, clutching the curtain. She was standing in the center of the room, holding something in her hand. For a moment, I thought it was a phone. Then I saw the glint of steel. A knife. I grabbed Benjamin's arm, whispering frantically for him to wake up. He blinked blearily, confused until I pointed across the street. That's when we heard it. A scream, muffled, cut off abruptly. Benjamin called 911. I didn't wait. I ran outside in the rain across the street, barely registering the cold. The front door to Quinn's house was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. I pushed it open. What I saw didn't make sense. Quinn was on the floor, blood seeping from a gash on his side. He was conscious, trying to crawl away. Ellie stood over him, calm, composed, her hair damp but perfectly combed. The knife in her hand dripped red, but it was what was behind her that turned my stomach. A wall of photographs, hundreds of them, all of Quinn, sleeping, eating, showering, sitting at his desk, talking to us. They were arranged chronologically, dates and times scribbled beneath each one in meticulous handwriting. She had been watching him for months, maybe longer, and not just watching, cataloging. Ellie turned and looked at me. No surprise, no anger, just mild annoyance, as if I had interrupted her in the middle of a routine chore. "You shouldn't be here," she said simply. Sirens wailed in the distance. She raised the knife, and Quinn, bleeding broken, grabbed her ankle and yanked her off balance. She fell hard, the knife skittering across the floor, toward me. Without thinking, I kicked it away. Benjamin crashed through the door seconds later, followed by flashing lights and shouting officers. They dragged her out in handcuffs. She didn't struggle, didn't scream, just smiled to herself as they led her away. That smile was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. As if she hadn't lost. As if this had all gone exactly the way she wanted. The days after were quiet. Too quiet. Quinn was in the hospital for a week. Broken ribs. Deep laceration. A concussion from when Ellie had thrown him against the edge of the marble counter. They said he was lucky. 1 inch to the left and the knife would have punctured his lung. Benjamin and I visited him the day he was discharged. He looked hollow, as if some part of him had been scraped out and tossed away. He tried to smile, said he was fine, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The bandages peeked out from under his shirt. He kept the curtains drawn and the lights low, and every few minutes his eyes flicked toward the front door, like he expected someone to come through it. "She planned it," he said finally. "She planned all of it." He told us about the cameras, the fake fights she'd started in public to create a record, the way she'd manipulated photos to make it seem like he was abusing her, a digital trail carefully curated. He was convinced she never loved him. He wasn't even sure she liked him. I think I was just a project. He said something she wanted to control, and when she couldn't, she decided to destroy me instead. He moved out a few days later, packed everything into a rental van, and drove away without saying goodbye. I don't blame him. The house sat empty again. "For sale" sign out front. The lights never came on, but I kept seeing things. Not Ellie. Not exactly. Shadows in the windows, a glint of something reflective where no glass should be, a low hum from the basement at 2 a.m. like a forgotten device. Waking up. Benjamin says it's my imagination, that I've been listening to too many crime podcasts, but sometimes late at night I sit on the porch with my tea and stare across the street. And I wonder, what if Ellie wasn't working alone? What if Quinn wasn't her only project? A few months passed, spring came and went. The house across the street remained unsold. The grass grew long, the mailbox overflowed. No lights, no visitors, no sign of Quinn. But Ellie stayed with me. I saw her in my dreams, always standing at the foot of Quinn's bed, smiling that cold, clinical smile. In one dream, she turned to face me, lifted a finger to her lips and whispered, "Shh, you're next." I stopped sleeping well after that. One evening, while organizing the attic, I found an old box of photo albums. I flipped through them absent-mindedly until I reached a page that didn't belong. Tucked between pictures of my daughter's third birthday party and our first family dog was a single Polaroid I had never seen. It was my porch, empty, except for one figure, me standing just inside the screen door. Blurry, mid-motion. I dropped it. Benjamin said it must have gotten mixed up somehow, that maybe I'd taken it and forgotten. But I knew better. A week later, I received mail with no return address, a manila envelope. Inside, more Polaroids. Dozens of them. All of me. Some taken from inside my house. Others from angles that shouldn't have been possible. One in particular froze my blood. It showed me sleeping, my mouth slightly open, the bedside lamp casting soft shadows across my face. I had never seen that lamp from that angle before, because it was from the inside of my closet. Benjamin wanted to call the police. I told him not to, because in the bottom of the envelope was a note typed in clean, blocky letters. "You look just like her." I checked the locks. I closed the curtains. I didn't leave the house after dark, but I knew it wasn't over. It had only just begun.